How is it possible that people go on a vacation in Europe, eat like an a-hole, and end up losing weight? They literally have pasta and gelato and croissants.
Croissant? Anyone want a croissant?
Wine all the time, beer, and still end up losing weight. Well, there's a lot of good reasons why Europeans are slimmer than Americans and why Americans going to Europe on a vacation end up losing weight. Some of them are very logical and some of them are a little bit surprising. And as a European living in America, I'll tell you how it's possible, how I lose weight when I go to Europe, how I gain weight when I come to America, and why that might be. It's common to joke about the Americans. We all know it. Americans are fat and stupid. And it's not fully the truth either, but there are nuggets of truth. And if you look at BMI of United States and different states, compared to different European countries, you notice that Americans are carrying more weight. And hi, if you're new to the channel, my name is Tero. I'm originally from Finland, hence the weird name and a slight accent. And I've lived in 10 countries, 5 of them being in Europe. I've lived in France, UK, Italy, Switzerland, and Finland. And then I've lived in the US for almost 10 years. I have an American wife. We have 3 kids. We live most of the year in Austin, Texas. Texas is seen as like big people too, right? At least in football. And then we spend summers in Europe. So we see both worlds at different parts in Europe, different parts of the US. And it's fascinating to see people in Europe are slightly slimmer. And I have theories. I wouldn't know, of course, but I have guesses. And in this video, I want to cover my guesses and give you some concrete actionable insights or tips maybe how you could benefit from some of the European lifestyle and dietary habits that would help you lose weight easy. In TikTok, Instagram, movies, whatever, pop culture, there's a common theme that Americans are fat and stupid.
Donnie, you're out of your element.
And Europeans are smelly, arrogant, but skinny. So which one would you rather be? Anyway, I think both stereotypes are a little extreme, but there's some nuggets of truth to it. And by statistics and data, you'll see that Europeans by and large are slimmer. They have a lower BMI. Now, before anybody comments on the whole thing, BMI is not a perfect measurement of how fat you are or how slim you are. It doesn't take into account how much muscle you have. And Americans will say we bench press more, and maybe you do. And not every state is the same in the US. If you live in California, you're probably a little slimmer than if you live in Alabama. And the same goes for Europe. If you're British, you're more likely to be fat than if you're Italian. And that's just, we're talking about averages. Nobody knows what the real reason is, by the way, why Europeans are slimmer, but I have guesses. But the guesses are not related to wealth. And we also know that it's not about genetics that much because many Americans are descendants of Europeans. You could almost argue that Americans have superior genetics to Europeans. I'm not going to comment on that. But if you look at life expectancy, we notice that a lot of European countries, people live a lot longer, even though the government spends less money per capita on healthcare. US can spend 4 or 5 times the amount of money, like almost $9,000 per person. Plus you also as an individual pay a lot if you're American for healthcare, but the government pays a lot and the outcomes are not so great. This video was inspired by my interview with a good friend of mine, Thomas DeLauer. He is a very good, amazing YouTuber and health expert. You can check out his channel. He has like 3 million subscribers or something like that, but he's a wealth of knowledge. And we did a sit down this summer in California to talk about the differences between the US and Europe. He spent a lot of time in Europe and has noticed some of the same things that I have noticed. And we kind of bounce back ideas. If you want to see that whole video, you can check it out. First reasons why Europeans might be slightly slimmer than Americans is that Europeans tend to walk more and just be generally more active. This form of non-exercise activity, it's actually called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT for short. This NEAT thing is pretty neat because it allows you to lose weight without really noticing that you lose weight, because you usually recover pretty easy from walking and just making laundry and going up and down the stairs. And it kind of happens as part of life. You don't even notice it. But if every day you spend an extra 200 calories, sure, burning a pound of fat, which is give or take 3,500 calories, takes a long time if it's 200 calories a day, but it happens like without a lot of effort and thinking. And over time, that probably is a way how Europeans end up leaner. A lot of Americans who go on vacation are surprised that suddenly now they're doing 20, 30,000 steps. Now that's a little extreme. I don't think many Europeans every day do 20, 30,000 steps. This is because they're seeing sights and walking around and they're not working. But achieving 10,000 steps or even 8,000 steps is not that hard in Europe. You take public transport, you walk to the bus stop or train stop, and from the bus stop, train stop to somewhere instead of here, you just drive through national parks and coffee shops. But that walking is an obvious way why Europeans are slimmer. So maybe you could walk more, you could use a step tracker and with alerts and try to get at least 8,000, ideally 10,000 steps a day. And what's cool about losing weight overall, and belly fat particularly, but also just walking, is that it directly link with all-cause mortality. If you take 7,500 steps a day, again, somewhere there, you're probably likely to lower your mortality by like 65%. It's one of the biggest things, maybe more important than not smoking, for example. Walking has a lot of benefits. You should do a lot of it, and it doesn't take away from your gains, by the way, if you're one of those guys. So, second reason why Europeans might be slimmer than Americans is that the portions are smaller. Who have heard of this? American, you get big portions.
Dad, can I borrow your glasses? I can't see my entree. You know, because it's so small.
I'll actually rephrase it slightly because it's not fully true that Europeans don't have big portions. I've had in all countries I've lived in and visited big meals. Sometimes the meals might take 3-4 hours, but you eat a lot. And if I track my calories, I might have 1,200 calorie meals in Finland and Italy both. But what happens is that not every meal is a big meal. Versus in America, I feel like breakfast, lunch, dinner, you try to get a same size meals all the time. Versus in Europe tends to be that in Finland, either the breakfast or lunch is bigger and then the dinner is smaller, or in the Southern European, like breakfast, lunch tends to be on the smaller and dinner seems to be bigger. You know, when I lived in France, people would have like coffee and a croissant for breakfast and a coffee and a baguette for lunch. So by dinner time, they've consumed like 500 calories, 600 calories. So if they have 1,000 or even 1,200 calorie dinner, which is a big meal with multiple courses and a dessert, they might still end up at like 1,700, 1,800 versus here, people by the time they do dinner, they already have 1,500 calories on their belt. So that can make a huge difference. So maybe you could consider intermittent fasting or just having smaller meals during the day. So you have more space for digestion. You could still have 30, 40 grams of protein if you're very specific about that, but having just a couple hundred calorie meals and a cup of coffee could be a way to be slimmer. Which takes me to the next point, which is coffee. I know Americans also drink a lot of coffee, but it's often coffee with a lot of sugar. It's crazy, but a lot of people's Starbucks order has more calories than a Big Mac meal. Insane. But if you just drink coffee, that actually there's a lot of evidence and literature that suggests that coffee can help you burn fat. But maybe more importantly, it suppresses appetite, and same sadly goes for smoking and cigarettes. It's not as common in Europe anymore as a lot of people say. Nevertheless, these are ways to suppress appetite. And at the end of the day, if Europeans are slimmer, as the thesis goes here, it's probably because they eat less, and Americans, they eat more than they consume. Yeah, that's how it goes.
I want an American cheeseburger. Hogan,
What on
drive.
earth for?
Cheeseburger first.
Now, a topic that the Instagram and TikTok loves, gluten.
Gluten's a vague term.
There's a theory that when people eat gluten in the United States, they're really sick and feel unhealthy.
Look, man, if you stopped eating gluten, you'd feel way better all day.
But when they go to Italy, they can eat bread and pasta. Well, that's partially maybe true. My wife is pretty much celiac and his dad is celiac, and they lived in Europe. And they've had this experience too. So I do believe in this. The type of wheat that you use in Europe is slightly different variety than the wheat we get here. There also might be things like glyphosate in it that might trigger certain inflammatory responses on some individuals. So I do believe in it. And if you buy that infamous croissant, it's probably made with real butter instead of fake butter here in a lot of cases. And the bread is made on sourdough versus regular bread. And those are not the same thing, even if the caloric value is the same thing. So yes, there are things like wheat and pasta that you might be able to consume more in Europe than in the US because of food quality, or in the US, you have to spend more time, money, effort to get high quality foods versus in Europe, the average food, average grocery store, even if it's not organic, is probably better quality, more fresh than the foods you get in the United States. Which takes me to two very important points besides this gluten and wheat debacle. One is that a lot of people who say they have this naturalistic fallacy sometimes that if they eat bread in Italy or France, it's always funny, by the way, it's Italy and France only. If they do that, they feel good. And if they eat it in the US, then they don't don't feel good. But there are other reasons why this experiment, this N of X many thousands of people who go on a vacation in Europe, why this might be explained. And one of them is stress. These people go on a holiday. They're not working. They're happy. They're laughing. They're walking. They're outside a lot. They're lower stress, lower cortisol, and they lose weight. So there are other factors. Sure, at the end of the day, it is calories in, calories out, but like the hormonal response and the stress response and the activity level, as mentioned before, can impact how much calories are you burning. And I think being on vacation, it's easier to lose weight than sometimes at home, especially if your home life is very stressful and you have a good vacation. The other part is the freshness and seasonality of foods. And this is a little more complicated and it kind of goes into the natural themes, but not quite. But in Europe, there's a bigger rotation of crops and foods that we eat. Be it at restaurants or grocery stores, they rotate foods that are in season more. And certain foods are hard to get throughout the year. And therefore, when the foods are fresh, they're shipped a shorter distance. And because they're shipped a shorter distance, they have more micronutrients, for example, let's say vitamins, vitamin C in them, than versus if they've been shipped a long time and stored a long time. And that might lead to you eating the same amount of food in your head, but actually like feeling more satiated and like feeling like you ate a big meal because the food had more nutrients, even if the calorically feels like they were the same.
It's really good.
So having seasonal foods probably means fresher foods, and fresher foods mean more seasonal foods. I don't know, chicken or the egg, but end of the day, you feel more satiated, you get more of these nutrients, and therefore you feel the urge less to overeat. Or maybe grace, maybe the meal is the same, but then you're not taking snacks all the time. I feel like Americans always love a car snack or on the go snack. And in Europe, it's kind of like those set consumption windows. And I think that might be a big factor here. The other thing about the satiation is very interesting is because Europeans have these quote unquote unhealthy foods, and because some of the meals are smaller and they can still fit in the calories, I feel like many Europeans don't feel that much stress about eating, and they feel like they're indulging in chocolate and wine and things like that. And therefore, they're happier and healthier, and they feel less the urge to overeat versus if you're really stressed out and pushing yourself, but then have big meals and your calories are slightly over. You might constantly be more stressed, but also have this urge of overeating at times. So having cheat meals is not something I like fully believe in. Like if you're on a diet, you probably shouldn't do cheat meals, like binging every Sunday, 10,000 calories, and then trying to eat less during the week is really tough because like it's hard to catch up on those 10,000 calories or even 6,000 calories. But like a little bit of indulgence, if you have other smaller meals, in theory should lead to losing weight or maintaining weight instead of gaining weight if the total daily and weekly caloric intake is in balance. There is something to be said about the cleaner label in Europe. So if you look at cured meats, or if you look at ketchup, they're comparing these labels and they notice that in Europe you have less stuff added. Now, there's some toxic load that probably comes from those added ingredients. I personally don't want to consume them, but I don't think they're that big of a deal. But they might challenge your digestion a little bit, and that might make certain like digestion parts harder, or you might have inflammation. At the same time, like in Europe, you have certain foods that are maybe more gut friendly. We mentioned sourdough as an example, but also a lot of like fermented dairy or fermented veggies, versus here people drink sugar water like kombucha. Having those breaks throughout the day when you're eating less, eating more fermented foods, having more seasonal foods, more variety in foods, probably leads to a better gut biome. And that might also be indicator why people in Europe or Americans visiting Europe don't get the same digestive upsets or pains that they get from eating similar foods back home. So as a summary, Europeans are not all slimmer than Americans, but many of them are, and you could learn a lot from them. And at the end of the day, they probably eat less than they consume, and Americans eat more than they consume. But how you achieve it effortlessly is the trick. Walking and this non-exercise activity is a huge factor. You should probably do that. Be outside, use public transport, or just generally go for walks. Try to hit your 8,000 to 10,000 steps. Having one smaller meal or even intermittent fasting probably works. A lot of fermented foods, a lot of seasonal foods, and some indulgences probably works if the daily calories match up. And I think if you kind of live like a European, you'll probably also have a happier, healthier life. Moderation. Moderation. But at the same time, being a European living in America, I also understand why it's easy to gain weight. I've never really been fat or ultra skinny ever in my life. I've always kind of been in the same fat percentage. But when I first moved to the US, I did gain a little bit of weight, and it sneaks up on you here. I can tell you that. Just the portion sizes are bigger and there's less activity. So you have to put a little more effort into designing your life to maintain wealth effortlessly and without stress and without panicking like a fitness influencer if you go from 6% body fat to 7. But it is doable, and I think we can learn a lot from Europeans. And also the Europeans can learn a lot from Americans in other areas of life. But hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you learned something new, a fresh perspective. Next time you go to Europe, you lose 10 pounds like many others. Thanks for joining, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.